Well, so here we are. We're live on Facebook. Hi, everyone. Emil Guillermo. Emil, among to you. You are behind the scenes in the double gonger Filipino. That's Benny Agbayani's official jersey with a official, I guess, a gangster medallion here. I'm here. Welcome to Sunday on your last weekend of Donald Trump. I mean, I only mention that because it is the last weekend. I don't know. Is he golfing? Are you golfing? It was sunny out here in my part of California, even though there was a lot of fog. But it's deceptive. You think I can go out. I can go out there, but you can't. You can't. You can't. I mean, you got to mask up, certainly, but it's not safe to go out there yet. So the museum's closed. Again, the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. We're closed again, but we're back here reaching you, talking to you about current history, past history, future history, Filipino American and whatnot. We're talking about it because we can. I should hasten to say the views expressed are those of the participants. Myself, the Gongs, the Benny Agbayani jersey, and whatever guest I have coming on with me today. Let me just say, wherever you're watching this, are you watching it on amok.com in the replay? Maybe you're watching this on Emil Guillermo Media on Facebook. If you are, hi everyone, it's me. It really is me. If you're watching it on the FANHS Museum, that's FANHS Museum page on Facebook. Look, we use Facebook because everyone old. No, we use Facebook because everyone tends to be on Facebook. We could use others. We could use TikTok, but I mean, at some point we will use TikTok, but right now we're on Facebook. So if you're wherever you are, hello, thank you for joining us. This is on Sunday. It's Sunday brunch with Emil at the FANHS Museum. We are bring your own food, bring your own lumpia. And I discovered how to cook lumpia with an air fryer. That is a real treat. When you cook lumpia with an air fryer, all the bad stuff in lumpia is gone. You got to take the meat out too. But all the bad stuff, the fried stuff in the lumpia, the grease, you don't neuter the lumpia. It actually tastes, it's better for you. You can eat more of them. How about that? And if you go vegetable instead of Shanghai with the meat, I'm telling you, air fried lumpia, insist on it. Tell those people who are cooking lumpias, say, hey, can you make it with the air fryer? It's better for my health. I will live longer. It works. It works. I've tasted it. You can get the bawang with the garlic, and it's great. Anyway, if you hear, like I said, last weekend of Trump, I don't know what's going on with the last week of Trump. Like I said, we'll have a special guest to talk about that. We are not open today at the museum for good reason. And I want to share this with you because this is our history. I mean, really, it's like our current history. Let me see. I got to share this. Share the page because it is. Look at this. The coronavirus in the U.S. latest map and case count, according to the New York Times. Last March, I tried. We tried to open up, but we shut down. We shut down in March. March 15th, we got the notice. By March 30th, we were totally shut down. Look at how many cases we had. We were shut down. There were only like 88 cases. Oh, that's March 1st. Let's go to March 30th. Look at that. Look at the down at the bottom there. There were 21,000 cases, 21,469. Wow. To go from 21 to to 16. Think of where you were as a Filipino American, between March 1st, right, when 88 cases, and did they talk about it very much? You know, uh, I'm just saying it's funny when you look at it. And then you see March 30th, we decided to shut down because there were 21,000 new cases. Uh-oh. Look at what history tells us. How panicked we were panicked, but actually we weren't panicked. We were just telling each other to wash our hands, right? I said, hey, there's that Prince song, you can be the president, I'd rather be the Pope. That is long enough to wash your hands and soap them up. Everyone was talking about, oh, I've got a hand washing song, because people thought it was, well, let's not make fun of it, but let's go about it in a fun way. Because if we're facing a pandemic, we better, got to do these things. Got to get our toilet paper, check, did that. Got to get our hand sanitizer, check, did that. Got to soap up, better than the hand sanitizer. And of course, I'm a big Prince fan. Can you tell by all the purple? And that you can be the president, I'd rather be the Pope. The Pope, use your soap. That works. So March 30th, we had 21,000 cases on March 30th. 31st, 24,000. We were saying, okay, we're going to do this. We can do this, people. We'll stop this. And look at, and then President was saying, oh, we're cool. And then we were sort of cool. Just 25,000 new cases. Oh, it'll get better when it's warmer. Oh, look, it got warm. July 4th. Remember? It was out there by the Mount Rushmore. It doubled to 50,000 cases. Did we get alarmed? No, we didn't get alarmed. Were we still closed at the museum? Yeah, we were still closed at the museum. But look at this. It just kept growing, but not that bad. And it looked like, we got through August. Let's see. We got through Memorial Day and all that. And September, Labor Day, 46,000. Okay, well, it's not 16,000, 18,000 in March. We're down to more like 46. Let's go crazy. And we did. We went crazy. And then look what happened. October. When Trump got the virus, we were at 53,000 cases. Look at where we are in October 2nd, and look at relative to where we were in March. We were okay, relatively. Things were in control. We didn't even have a vaccine. Trump was still talking about, well, we can bleach. He was using different things. He went off in a helicopter to Walter Reed, and we were still at only 47,000 cases, which was a lot. But did we didn't learn. We just thought, oh, we're good. We're good. Oh, let's go to Thanksgiving. Oh my God, Thanksgiving. Oh no, we thought we were good. And then things just went crazy. Now we're at 172 new cases in November. And then Thanksgiving, we just exploded in Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving was the 25th. We had 180,000 cases. History is kind of hindsight sometimes. Look at back in March. Look at what happened in March, and look at that. It's not even a roller coaster. It was like straight up. And of course, we get the Thanksgiving spike. Oh, well, we'll be okay. Well, we can last to Christmas. And look, we got a little better. We held our own. But now, we got the Christmas spike. I mean, look at where we are. We're coming down because I guess we're coming to our senses. Did January 6th, when all hell broke loose at the Capitol, 280,000 new cases a day? What did we learn after almost a year of the vaccine? I mean, this is something that, look, the current history, you Filipino Americans and other non-Filipinos who are watching. You know what you were doing back in March. What happened? And look at the data suggests, okay, after January 6th, it's gone down a little bit, not nearly enough to let us feel that with a new administration coming up that we're out of this. We're not out of this yet. So this is the coronaviruses. All right, the new cases. Look at the deaths. Almost 400,000 deaths. Oh my God! Yesterday I was saying 300,000. I was confused because I said 3,000 because that's a daily number. See, the daily number reached 3,000, and we still weren't getting vaccinated. I know many of you are in the newly anointed, hey, I can get my vaccination. Oh, but where? They haven't told us yet. They haven't told us where to go. Oh, I know. Keep that word to yourself. I know you want us to go. But, 395,000 total cases. Yeah. I just, it's just disheartening. We're trying to be optimistic here. We got a 3-day weekend. We could be optimistic on a 3-day weekend, right? Let me admit, Daniel Phil Gonzales on our program here. Dan, unmute, please. Hi, Dan.
Good morning. Sorry about the hassle.
No problem. We're live. Dan Gonzales is a professor of Asian American Studies, Filipino American Studies, College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. I like to bring him in because Dan he's actually one of the deans of Filipino American history. We can talk about current history. We can talk about anything. And this is a critical moment. Dan, while you were trying to get in, I was talking about coronavirus. I don't think you hear that in the waiting room, but I was just commenting on this, just the number of new cases, just looking at the New York Times graph. And to think that we're doing this right now,
right?
Our pop-ups, because back in March when we had, let's see, March 30th, when the nation had just 21,469 cases, we said, hey, we got to shut down to protect ourselves.
That's right.
And hey, what we wouldn't give to have just 21,000, new cases, right? A day. Because right now on the new case level, we're more like 200,000 cases a day. And we're like 3,353 deaths a day. So this is history, and a lot of people are, these days are data conscious. What does this data tell you about us?
Oh, what a terrible question. It's not that the question is so bad. It's just that my response is going to be so negative.
Well, look, I'm just saying that, we come at this juncture, the last weekend of Trump, not to bury Trump or not to denounce him. We just look at what is, we can look at just the last year and see how
this is a perennial problem of people, particularly when I have to teach political science. And one of the big sections, I call them, where I'm teaching up to 130 people in one section in a given semester, is the political science and law course. It's about government and law, and it's a required course for graduation. There was a whole lot of politics behind that, but I was the person who expanded the requirement at the SF State campus. I championed the requirement. I literally wrote the policy that expanded the requirement from 3 units to 6 units, because back in the 80s and the late 70s, when I was on the academic senate at SF State, I could see that one, our students were really under-equipped to deal with the oncoming era of so-called conservative politics, and I felt that our requirement was inadequate. So I was joined by all of the traditional departments that had been offering for decades exclusive courses dealing with politics and government and American history, who had resisted the participation of ethnic studies in those courses. They had resisted the participation of women's studies to get administrative sanction for those courses. And then when I advanced the 6 unit idea, suddenly I got all kinds of support, which is exactly what I expected. That is one of the reasons. It's a subordinate reason, but it's one of the reasons that I advanced that issue, and it won convincingly. Now, um, what this rise in cases is showing us is that there's a significant number of, unfortunately, a large population of America. All people are represented across racial, class, ethnic, and immigration status boundaries, right? That there are a substantial number of people who are within the jurisdiction of the United States of America, and that includes its territories as well, okay, who either don't believe that the science, okay, or they're conflicted about whether or not to follow the recommendations because it's a restriction on their freedoms. They actually believe that, and they're actually caught on that dilemma, a substantial number of them. So when you add those two groups together, okay, you're talking about people who do not understand their responsibility to the rest of society. They do not accept that responsibility. Rather, they see their exercise or failure to exercise recommended practices concerning COVID-19, they see it as a restriction, an
Yeah.
inhibition. In fact, they look at it as not only a political inhibition of their rights, they look at it as a probable legal inhibition of their rights. That's where we are. That's the problem with American society. It is, as its root in one of our previous conversations, an educational problem. This society has failed to educate children and adolescents early enough to prepare them, because the majority of Americans do not get college degrees. They are not exposed to institutional requirements like the 6 unit political science and history requirement that we have at SF State and other universities. Okay, they get away with being taught by honestly right
Yeah.
wing teachers, and so the rest of
Usually people complain about the opposite, that, oh,
yes, they
you're
do.
getting
Yes, they
less to
do.
do.
But at the grade school level, and depending on the geography, right?
Right.
On the coasts, they're going to get a more broad scope discussion, even at the early grades, right, about the reality of American constitutional democracy. But in the middle and in the South, they get really skewed perspectives. And this
So
is
you're talking,
controlled by legislatures that do things like Texas has the biggest order of textbooks for K through 12. Okay. And
yeah.
so their weight controls what goes into the national publications of textbooks. Okay. They pushed to eliminate or to restrict discussion of Jeffersonian principles and insisted on the injection of the perspective of Jefferson Davis, the president
Oh,
of the Confederacy. That's the
Prof.
kind of
Jefferson.
stuff. That's the kind of stuff that's going on in other parts of the country. So people like me who take political science very seriously are not at all surprised by what happened last week. We're not at all surprised by that. Okay.
You're
And
talking about the double impeachment.
well,
Is that what you,
well, double
or,
impeachment. That no, I'm talking about 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago
okay,
now.
2 weeks. You're talking about the January
January
6th.
6th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
6th. Yeah.
I'm not at all surprised. I'm not at all surprised by the failure. And it wasn't a failure of leadership. It was a successful leadership of Mr. Trump and his ilk in having people convinced that the election was illegitimate, that it was not a fair election.
But you see, Dan, you're bringing it, you're making it general to all. Now let's talk specifically about Filipinos, because I know that in here, and I'll talk about. I want to make a segue into the next segment where I'm going to talk about Filipino nurses. But
Oh boy.
here, you know, yeah, well, but here we see this. What is the Filipino American role? I mean, because some I know are
Oh,
saying, "Okay, what does this have to do with the Filipino history, Filipino American history?" Well, the thing is, we're part of this. We're part of this, and we can't deny that this is the current history. This is, the New York Times puts it on the website, and you can see it, but it gets obscured. You don't really see the numbers. But just seeing this fact can explain not just what's going on now, but what's going on, what went on January 6th, and also it shows the last year, and it shows how we are thinking. It shows the consciousness of the nation. But now, what applies to Filipino Americans, and what do you see, Dan?
well, okay. You remember the exit polls for 2016?
Yeah.
We were at 27% of our voters voted for Trump. I think that's an undercount. I think it was probably over 30%. Um, and I guess happily, oh, we were number one among all of the Asian American ethnic groups, voters. We were the highest number of voters for Trump.
In
That's
what, 2020,
recent. In
2016? Or
2016. In 2020, we're number two, right?
yeah.
So Vietnamese have maintained roughly their same level of commitment to Mr. Trump by vote, and we have lessened the numbers, but we're still over 20%.
Yeah.
So 1 out of 5 people minimally in our community think that this guy would be a good bet for the next 4 years. They also may believe that the election was fake. So to that extent, depending on, now, once again, we are also geographically influenced. Okay. So if we live in areas, for example, like Ohio, where uh, Ohio has always had extreme social perspective. And when you look at, it's really laughable when you look at Supreme Court cases involving things from free speech all the way to voter suppression and ID laws and all the rest of it. Ohio is extremely suppressive and oppressive. And so there are a significant number of Filipinos there, and they're very much
Well,
Republicans. They very
well,
much
also
are
look,
very strong, and they're
the ma-
successful as
well,
Republicans.
the fact that you mentioned Ohio is no coincidence, because the leading Filipino American who is pro-Trump is the local Republican politician there. I think he's in the state house, or he was mayor of a small town
Yes,
in
yes,
Ohio, Ron Falcone.
yeah,
And then the people that I talk to in Ohio I used to be on a regular basis. We would text and email doctors. A lot of them went to University of Santo Tomas, and are working in large, major American clinics, front lines. We used to have a dialogue about, well, where do you stand on Trump now? How do you like him now? And they were always, further entrenched, and this includes doctors. So
yes,
I'm
yes.
just saying that, you look at something like this and you say, well, what does this have to do with Filipino Americans? Well, a lot, because if the underlying thing that, states where we are as a country is that, well, some people believe in the truth and some people don't. Some people believe in science and some people don't. And it's all just a matter of how you look at the truth. If this is a truth, it's like some people are standing in it, looking at it squarely, and some people are standing on another side and looking at it and saying, it's not really there. It's
Well, what's
how do you get
dangerous?
around that?
What's dangerous also is that even though we're talking about Ohio, and so it's a small portion of the
No,
Filipino American society. Doctors are very influential,
right.
and it may not necessarily. And so there's a class issue as well. and a lot of people gravitate to the Republican Party because they see themselves, particularly people who are business people, right? They see themselves as being part of the image. They relate to the image of the Republican Party as the pro-business party, including pro-small business, which I contest heavily, right? That they've done anything, the Republican Party, that's pro small business. I mean, that is so contrary to obvious political policy and fact. What they
Well, look,
say is not what they do.
well, look at the facts about who got the PPP, the PPP funds,
Sure,
right?
that's just
Mostly
one
the
recent
big,
example, but we're talking
yeah.
about a pattern that extends over 100 years. You know,
Oh, and talking about patterns again,
that's
talking about those
that's the
patterns,
social science thing to do, historian.
like the patterns mean something. Hey, Dan, see, I wanted to know this graph or this curve because it really is just nonpartisan. It's just the numbers. And it's just hard to imagine that
Yeah, but
anyone can look
see,
at
the
these
partisan
numbers.
part is how do they perceive it? Do they believe it? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of
Well, so,
people don't believe it. I mean, what are those doctors in Ohio looking at? Do they
yeah.
believe it? Okay.
I
And do
say,
they
give,
believe that people's behavior is contributing to this increasing pattern? Now, there's a little
well,
bit
there's,
of a drop there. There's a little bit of a drop there over the last couple of weeks.
yeah.
So that may
Yeah,
be a
look,
good sign.
well, it's like for as long as we had this debate, look at how things were sort of
Oh
still
yeah.
under 100,000, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
as
Yep.
late as November, or as late as October, when Trump got the virus, right? We're
Yeah.
still kind of okay. But then here's what the thing: as soon as it seemed like okay, we're coming up to the holidays, I guess we're okay. There's this understanding that well, we're under 50,000 or right around the 50,000 case level. That's okay. Let's go out. Let's, forget the mask
Yeah. They
and then
loosened
look
up.
at the rise. Look at the rise. Look at the rise.
Yeah, sure.
And
Well, there
so
were some
I,
states there were several states that never had even a partial
no,
closure, lockdown, or slowdown. Several states. Remember, there was the Midwest and there was Texas, right? Where
right.
where they said no, we're not doing any of that. North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska got smarter. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Ohio
Iowa,
resisted for a
Iowa did.
while.
And so now
Kansas
look,
really bad.
yeah, now
Texas awful.
everyone is hurt. Everyone is affected.
That's right. That's right.
And now you're starting to see some people, some, retract what they said or believe, but not nearly, in the numbers that you would think that would, that would show that these people have a sense of reality. But to get back to the Filipino Americans again, uh, this is I show this to us because or to our audience because this is why the museum is closed. This is why the museum has to do virtual stuff because it's dangerous out there. And this is a reminder to Filipino Americans that if they have not, uh, you know, change some of their habits. Let's hope that the more are wearing masks regularly. I know it's hard because some people haven't been to church in you know 9, 10, 11 months, but and church is a big thing. Some people haven't seen their families in a long time, but this is an important thing to if you look at this curve and you look at the data and you look at how many people have died about 3,300 yesterday. Three almost we're getting to 400,000 deaths uh, during the course of this pandemic, and 400,000. We're talking more than some wars. You know, so if you don't believe that we're in a war against this pandemic, well, get patriotic because we're fighting this invisible virus. And what makes matters worse is that the virus is mutating. And by time we all get our vaccines, it may be ineffective against the new mutation. That's a sad thing.
Yep.
So,
That's
so
that's where
Dan,
we're at. I mean, it's even if you
Yeah.
get the vaccine, you still got to mask up. So
Yeah.
there's a
You
certain
still
amount
have
of
to mask.
discipline that's necessary, right? Um,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. It was a Latino member of Congress that got both vaccines, right, 1 and 2,
Uh,
and then still came down with COVID-19. And so
really?
immediately,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. You can't,
his
you
last
can't
name started with an E.
Oh, you can't presume that because you get the vaccine, you're going to be immune. You can't presume that, yeah, you still can't be an asymptomatic carrier.
Carrier, that's
That's
right.
the other,
That's right.
if you're asymptomatic, hey, I'm fine, I'm fine. No, but you're a carrier and you can give it to somebody. I'm fine, I'm fine. Oh, they're sick now because of you. And this is the danger of this. And I just, if people were more informed or better informed, and more knowledgeable, they would take maybe the necessary precaution. I know you got to go to work, but at least mask up. But how about those football players, the basketball players? I
That's
guess thank goodness that they're there to give us a sense of normalcy. Oh, we're going to watch the game. But, do we need basketball? Do we need football? Do we? And
yeah.
now they're now
Evidently,
we're
we do. Yeah, no,
well,
people are totally dependent on that pattern. It's again a behavioral pattern. They don't they want to try and recover as much of quote normalcy unquote as
yeah.
possible, and that's not going to be if we're going to beat this epidemic, right? This pandemic, we're going to have to be very much more disciplined.
Well,
And
more
and
discipline here. Look, more discipline here when there's like 200,000 new cases and 224,000, average, if nearly 400,000 deaths. We got to be more disciplined here than we were back here in March 30th,
yes,
when we
no,
first closed the museum.
that's
You
true.
There was like nothing, and
That's
we
true.
couldn't. And look, you may have been excused if you said, it's nothing, it's nothing. Well, it was nothing, 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 nothing. Now it's something. Now we got to do something.
Well,
So,
I know some families, although I try to do a biweekly check of members of the family, particularly those that are most advanced age. And
yeah,
so anyway, everybody seems to be okay. And there's only about, first cousin distance where there have been deaths.
yeah, oh,
But it's still people that I'm familiar with. I
yeah,
haven't gone around to everyone, um, but I try to do everybody that's my age and older, or. But anyway, the
yeah,
point is that they all have been, exercising discipline.
yeah.
But many of my cousins are health professionals or retired health professionals. They're nurses. I have my first cousin and her husband. He's a doctor, just retired a few years ago, and she's a nurse.
And
Uh,
they're doing they're practicing.
absolutely, and
Yeah,
they were from a very conservative. He had his practice in a very conservative state.
yeah,
There's a whole history around that, and maybe we'll get to that when we talk about nurses. But
sure. Okay.
he was from
Well,
West
look,
Virginia, man, West Virginia,
yeah,
mansion country, right? And
yeah,
the guy ran a clinic, for decades.
yeah.
They have a second home in Henderson, another conservative area, in Nevada,
Or
and they
Nevada.
have a home here in the Bay Area, and I get to see them every once in a while,
Well, see, look, you just described the American dream there, buddy.
yeah,
Because
yeah, and he's kind of
when,
conservative. I mean, we have discussions that are approximate arguments, I guess, all the time.
yeah,
And
well,
he's relatively conservative, but I don't think
well,
he was a zealous supporter of Trump. I think maybe in
yeah,
2016 he may have voted for Trump, but he was not a zealous supporter of Trump. And
well,
now I don't know. I don't even know if he's willing to vote Republican at all.
well, the Republicans are a mess right now.
Yeah, not to them. They don't think so.
Yeah. Well, a lot of infighting, a lot of,
Yeah, yeah.
and a lot of people want to get to the people who want impeachment. A lot of people in impeachment says we're standing for the truth. And, there's Liz Cheney, who some conservatives are putting up Liz Cheney as a hero, and some people taking her down, saying she's terrible. And there's Lindsey Graham once again, pendulum
Well, it
swinging,
seems to be a
lying.
majority. It seems to be a majority of Republicans that are aiming at Liz Cheney, and
Well,
of course, they have their own interests. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? That
yeah,
187 Republicans in the House voted to support the questioning of the election. It
it,
doesn't make sense. The anti-impeachment thing, it doesn't make sense because they're actually just hurting their own party. They may be thinking that they're serving their interest because they believe their constituents, the majority of their constituents, right, are still
right,
heavy Trumpers,
yeah.
supporters of Trump. But that's going to change. That's going to change. It'll take time, but that's going to change. My
Well,
concern is much more with the violent ones. You know,
right. We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. Look, if you're listening, we're just showing this chart, the coronavirus chart, because something we live with. It is our history. It's the reason why this museum pop-up is online virtually instead of live in the Stockton Museum, the FANHS Museum in Stockton. But then look, if we weren't virtual, then wherever you are, if you're in Southern California, Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, LA, whatever, you can come and watch this in Stockton. Or would you drive up to fly in to go to Stockton? Maybe, but this is the silver lining that, hey, we can get together here and talk about this, which is the graph. I've been talking with Professor Daniel Phil Gonzales of the College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State, Filipino American scholar, Asian American scholar. We've been talking about this as we do often, just talking about things coming up. We're going to talk more about, I mentioned the nurses. I mentioned that we're going to talk more about the violence that Dan mentioned. I'm going to say happy birthday to Leatrice Perez or Leatrice Perez, Letty Perez, who's on our board. That's coming up a little later. So still a lot of things that we're going to talk about. I did mention to Dan that, well, there was a story in the New York Times. There she is, a Filipino nurse.
mhm.
And the headline, "It's Starting Again, Why Filipino Nurses Dread the Second Wave." This is very indispensable to New York City hospitals. Healthcare workers from the Philippines died in shocking numbers last spring. Will things be different this winter? This is a story that we've been talking about, that I've been talking about in my columns at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, at aldef.org/blog. I have been talking about it in inquirer.net. Oh, by the way, we're also going to talk about the King holiday a little later too.
Okay,
We're going to
good.
squeeze it all in. We're going to squeeze it all in.
Woohoo! Woohoo!
Yeah. Here they're talking about Belinda Ellis, who's been a nurse for 40 years. She thought she saw it all. She worked in the hospitals in the Philippines where she was born and got her degree. She was a nurse in Saudi Arabia, then at a
Whoa!
military hospital in Iraq. Boy, Belinda Ellis, and I think
Wow!
this is Belinda Ellis. Here she is. This woman is like the face of the Philippine diaspora. If you want to
Also,
talk about
also,
history,
she's a perfect model
yeah,
of all of the nursing experience that are described by Professor Choi, my colleague at
yeah.
UC Berkeley.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Uh, right. Kathy Choi.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the esteemed professor of Asian American Studies or Asian
That's right.
American.
A
Is it
little
what's
bit
it
of
called?
women's
Berkeley?
studies, and she's also in an interdisciplinary
Yeah,
program, but
yeah.
United Science and social studies. Just an
An old
outstanding professor.
an old neighbor of mine. Anyway, Professor
Oh,
Choi writes
really?
about just, yeah, when we lived in the East Bay. But now this is Belinda Ellis. Now look, Belinda Ellis. Look, she is the model of the Philippine diaspora. And she talks about the first wave here. If you go to the New York Times, they give all these studies where they found how nurses who died, a third of them were Filipino. And according to the ProPublica study, there's another analysis. the New York City area alone, at least 30 Filipino healthcare workers have died from the virus by June. And so they talk about Erwin Lambrento, a tenacious night shift nurse from the outskirts of Manila who worked at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. That's where Miss Ellis works. I've got to get in touch with her because the person I talked to, Jim, he was out of there and I haven't been able to get a hold of Jim. I hope he's well. He had the virus once and he was doing well. I hope you're well too, Dan, with your cough there.
I'm sorry, I
But
didn't hit my
I
mic
hope
button quickly enough.
I, I hope it was a cough and not a sneeze. Anyway, because that's where we are now with the virus. So any little I got a sore throat. Anyway.
It's a cough, it's allergies, it's ongoing, and
Okay, good. I'm
it's scary.
I'm happy for you. All right, so here
You happy I got allergies? Thanks, man.
she says they talk about their colleague Erwin Lambrento. And they say his presence is still all over. If I think about it, I'll get emotional. It's still very fresh. He died in May, just in May, and his picture hangs there at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. Here's the survey that was published in September by the National Nurses United, the largest nurses union in the US. 67 Filipino nurses have died of COVID-19. And that figure was pulled just from public obituaries. It's around a third of the total registered nurses who've died nationwide, although Filipinos make up only 4% of those nurses overall. So imagine that. This is incomplete data, right? Culled from public obituaries. 67 Filipino nurses died of COVID-19. But of that number, right, it's a third. So 30% of the nurses who died nationwide, and yet Filipinos are only 4% of the nation.
Total population, yeah.
Yeah. So think of that. 4%, 30% of the nurses, right? We're just 4% versus 30%, and we bear the
my
brunt.
cousin's reaction to that, the doctor, not the nurse, but my cousin's reaction to that was, of course, because they make up the majority of the frontliners. They're the frontliners in the high density areas, in the big urban centers. So and that was his response 6 months ago, 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah. Well, it's just sad to think that a third of the nurses who die, are Filipino, and yet
greater exposure. I have a former student who's in one of the ICU specialized centers for COVID-19. And he's my source of deep information. I have my own deep information source. And he tells me what's going on in real terms. And I don't disclose everything that he tells me because I don't want people to know who he is or be able to identify him. But he's at Stanford.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, look, they're all over, right? And you get your inside information, but it's sad when you see it's just so out of proportion. Like I said, when people think about it, are Filipinos paying the price? And we talked about, look at that death curve. Look at that death curve. See where we are. Okay, fine. Here's another stat. 67 nurses have died, and it's a third of all, of the registered nurses who've died. It's a third. So that means we're roughly talking about more than 200 who have died nationwide, and 67 of them are Filipino.
Well, it would also be interesting to look at how many Filipinos that are in what we call, essential worker categories.
Oh yeah,
that have close contact with people, because they're not only supernumerary among nurses, also among EMTs. We got a pretty high concentration of Filipinos among EMTs, and some of them are former military veterans. Well, not, they're veterans. All right.
Well, this number here, keep in mind, just nurses, does not include the EMTs, the other frontline workers or the other essential workers, as you put it.
Right.
And then
We
you
got
see
we got
Zenny Cor-
phlebotomists,
yeah,
significant
the
number of
phlebotomy.
I have a cousin who's a phlebotomist. She was a doctor in the Philippines.
And
But
only, I'm sure only because of discrimination of, she's a doctor in the Philippines. Is she good enough to be a doctor here? It was,
yes, but you have to go through the educational process and retake two sets of exams, right?
right. That's the
The
discrimination
national and
process.
the yeah.
That's how they weed them out. That's how they weeded out the Filipino lawyers who are now janitors, or the Filipino
That's
doctors
true
who are
too.
now janitors. Right.
And
So
they used
it's,
to weed out
I,
the teachers who were,
right.
bank clerks and working in insurance companies, doing clerical work.
So,
But yeah, there's a whole history of that. Another one of those patterns, Emil. One of those
oh
irritating,
yeah,
annoying.
this is a pattern of history where the smart Filipino from the Philippines doesn't get the break in America, so they have to do lesser jobs.
Well, they had
They-
families,
they-
and
well,
so
well,
the
yeah,
choice was the choice was go back to school, and which is going to take time and money, right? Or
right,
get a job that with which you can support your family. And the initial large migration of the late '60s, right? The economy was much better,
yeah,
and because largely because we were fighting the Vietnam War, so
yeah,
it was a war economy, and the immigrants were needed. I mean, one of the reasons that the Immigration Reform Act was effective and signed off by Congress and the president was because they saw the need to get more cheap labor in some instances, right?
yeah,
Exploitable labor, and in other instances to get technical expertise because there wasn't enough in the pipeline, the college pipeline, to supply the needs of the United States. So
right.
that's one of the reasons they opened the gates.
Well, but one of the, I mean, but I only bring this up, because we mentioned about how the people from the Philippines, because we're an immigrant culture. I'm curious if it
Yep,
doesn't
very
exist.
much so.
I'm curious if it doesn't exist today, where people who are doing great things in the Philippines come to America and have to do lesser jobs because of discriminatory practices against Filipinos. I mean, that is, that's why you see a lot of really smart Filipinos in places that you don't expect. He said, "What are you doing here?" Well, I have to work for my family, like you said. I have to do
Yes,
this for,
that's it. That's it. The most
we find
immediate source.
ourselves historically underachieving because the barrier has been placed over us.
Right.
And that is the reality. And so let's go to Zenny Cortez, who I know or I've met, and we've had discussions. President of the National Nurses Union, a nurse from the Philippines herself. She says it's really heartbreaking what's happening with the nurses. But here's the numbers we are producing are all underreported. I'm sure of that. So to go back to the numbers, 30%, a third of all total registered nurses who have died are Filipinos, a third, and yet we're only just 4% of the nurses overall. So we are outdoing it by about 6 or 7 times, right?
Yeah. Well,
We this is the Filipino, and historically, this historical fact is something that if you're watching, listening, keep it in mind. Filipino American history today. Just you want to take a temperature of our status. Here's a temperature of our status.
Woo.
Keep that in.
You put it
Well, I
that
mean,
way. Okay, here comes the sneeze.
well,
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, so that's all right. This is the article. Here's the mural of Woodside, Queens, part of an area called Little Manila, honors the Filipino healthcare workers. Uh, this is where Jim, the nurse that I talked to in all of my articles to date, this is part of that area, Little Manila, in Queens, and this is an article that goes into the nursing schools, and it talks about Ellis, the nurse that we showed her picture. And look, we talk. They talk about a professor of nursing at William Patterson University in New Jersey, a Filipino, Leo Felix Gerardo, who wrote his dissertation on the importation of Filipino nurses into American hospitals, and how he was recruited uh, back. He's 55. He was recruited in 1988. So this is an historical article that you'll find in the New York Times. Headline: This in today's Sunday Times. It's starting again. Why Filipino nurses dread the second wave. And so, uh, a sad thing. It goes in with our earlier discussion about this, the coronavirus wave. Uh, I don't know. Do you think that? I think that there's more to fear. I think that the percentage of Filipino nurses who will be impacted will be greater. What do you think, Dan?
No, I agree, and you should. Our watchers should also note that there's 141 comments, which is pretty rare that one story gets that many very quick comments. I mean, this is a news story that just got printed, just got published today. And it's
Yeah.
already got 141 comments,
Well,
and most of them are coming from people who are
yeah,
critical of the system or who themselves are health workers.
yeah.
They're critical of
So,
the system because the unfairness of the distribution of responsibility and all that kind of stuff.
oh yeah. Let's read a comment. Someone says it's definitely starting over. Someone says follow the money, thank the insurance companies uh, that have destroyed our medical system, pay the nurses and doctors good wages so they can all do what they want to do, help heal us. So that's someone critical of the system. When the pandemic is over, there should be a Filipino nurse or doctor in every medical TV or film. The Hollywood industry owes it to them at the very least. Are you listening, Hollywood? Now, this is funny.
Hey, that's good.
This,
I
this,
like that one.
well, I like this, but you know, there are, we're talking about life and death issues, right? We're talking, I
Yeah,
mean, in terms of
but
Filipino
yeah,
nurses, and I'm not knocking Paul Mirador. He's probably in the Hollywood business. Are you listening, Hollywood? Yes, I hope they are because, look, I write my columns, talk about politics. It talks about other things, right? But it also talks about our Hollywood image, our image in our culture, our image in our pop culture, our image in our arts and theater, our image on television. My career was a television reporter. Where get this, there is only people having their based on their generation. They know, well, if they see a Filipino, there's only one or two, and so if someone says Emil Guillermo, some people think, oh, you're the Filipino I saw on television. For a generation, there's some people think that. And it doesn't matter if it's me or another Filipino, they'll think I'm the same Filipino. They'll think it happened. It happened yesterday. Someone on the chat, because there's a Filipino who was on another channel, and they say, "Oh, you were on that channel." No, that wasn't me. I didn't point it out, but I am now. That was another Filipino. And then it doesn't just extend with other Filipinos. It extends with any brown person who was in television. The infamous nice guy Rigo Chacon on Channel
yeah,
7
yeah.
in San Francisco. People, when I would go out on a story as a Filipino American, just as a reporter for another competing station, people would stop me and say, "Hey, Rigo," to me, and
You
so
don't look anything like Rigo.
I know. Rigo and I have exchanged notes over the years recently. But here's the thing: when I see this note here, when I see
There are a
this
couple
note here,
other
when the
guys that might pass that are a little closer to you, but the shoe is also on the other foot. Okay, and that is, I would tell people I had spoken to Mr. KTVU, who was on
yeah,
there forever, right? I mean, he started like in '69 or something. Well, right out of
Yeah,
college, and
yeah.
and and only retired within the last 5 or 6 years, right? And they would say to me, "Is he Filipino?" Because everybody thought he was Mexican. Everybody thought he
Yeah.
was Mexican.
Well, that's the
Yeah. So
thing. Yeah, I know. Look, when I worked in Dallas, people thought I was Mexican. In Dallas, I was invited to speak to LULAC one year.
well,
Uh,
that's cool.
in
Did you
Dallas.
do
Well,
it?
yeah, look, yeah, the League of United Latin American Citizens, I think. So Latin American communities. LULAC. I did meet with LULAC. I gave a speech there. I was still a young guy. I hadn't really been fully uh uh I wasn't really fully aware of everything that was going on. But, to get back to Paul Mirador here,
Yeah.
yeah, the
I think
important
this
thing,
is,
I
sure. Yeah, it's kind of shallow in a way, right? Yeah, but it is an
yes and no.
opportunity. It's an opportunity. It's an
Yeah, yeah. Well,
opportunity. He's talking about having a mass influence on the way people
yeah.
look at Filipinos. That's what he's talking about. And and and
Look,
I think he may have been motivated by the fact that you remember that show, that sitcom, where there were several slights against Filipinos, and particularly
um,
including Filipino doctors. And
Desperate Housewives made fun of of doctors who went to had a Philippine medical degree. That
mhm.
was one show, but there have been others.
Oh
Let
yeah,
me just say,
lots.
yeah, let me just say that in my columns, I write about representation. This is all about representation, right? Do we see us? And when I've done stuff in the theater, I've done stuff on on television as a reporter, but in the theater when I do my shows, I always say I've got to tell this Filipino story because people don't know this. This is what diversity is about. So I applaud Paul Mirador of Los Angeles and hope that people are seeing this because, as you say, it appears shallow, but it's not. It's important that people see Filipina nurses or doctors in
Right.
every medical TV show because I saw a show the other day. I was thinking this the other day. There's a show called The Nurses. I don't know if
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
any Filipino
It's new.
nurses.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any Filipino. I see a show called The Doctors. Are any Filipino doctors? I don't think so. I mean,
Mm.
I would like and in my columns, I've written about Filipino representation in the past. Remember Ponzi Ponce and Hawaiian Eye,
Oh no,
who
my
played
God!
Ponzi
You
Ponce.
don't look nearly old enough for that. You don't look that old,
I
man.
know
But yeah,
Ponzi Ponce. He was a Filipino.
Hawaiian
Oh,
Eye.
yeah,
There was
Hawaiian Eye.
Hawaiian Eye.
One of the first
Yeah.
black and white television shows. Now, all you young people out there, black and white was a kind of television we had. No, Ponzi Ponce, Hawaiian Eye. How about this? In cut TV in color. Once we had color TV, Gene Barry in Burke's Law had a Filipino driver.
That's right.
And I write about him in my columns. You can just look up Alde on the Aldef site. And then and those kind of things influenced me when I took some acting classes at Harvard as well as my history classes, and I said, well, do I want to really be go into show business when I don't even show up? This is an important comment from Paul Mirador, and it gives an awareness because when we're aware of Filipino nurses and Filipino anything, well, damn, you know, we have to acknowledge them, right? Even if they're just bit parts. So
Yeah,
Paul Mirador,
absolutely, absolutely.
we honor him. Now look here. I wish I could say something new, but there is just this
This one, yeah, this one's really
old
strong.
truth. Capitalism only works for a tiny few. As you educate yourself about the medical corporation's abuse of Filipino workers, of course, she misspells Filipino, but that's all right. It's a strong statement. Continue your research into the plight of childcare workers, home health
She's
aides,
right.
domestic aides, fill in the blanks.
Yep,
Amen. She's right.
she's right.
And
And by the way, for decades, or at least a decade, at the local 99 ranch in Daly City, they misspelled Filipino.
yeah, well, look, yeah,
Had to
you got
sign up, man.
to. You got
And my
to,
student said, well, why didn't you tell them? Why didn't you? I said, because I want to see how long that inaccuracy was tolerated by the community, by the local community. All kind of Filipinos shop in the place. Why? I wanted to see how long it would take, you know?
you know, you're right. Look at how many times they misspell things in Chinese restaurants, right? And
Yep.
how many times they look and misspellings, mispronunciations. I say Guillermo because the Filipinos say the ly,
Yeah.
and people say, "Oh, you're Guillermo. Why are you putting on airs?" No, it's a ly, Guillermo. And
Yeah.
so anyway, look, um,
Yeah. They say Villa, for example, you know, Carlos
yeah,
Villa.
of course, yeah, yeah.
They do.
So I'm really glad that you pointed out both these comments because usually I don't go into the comments because I don't know I just don't go into the comments. But
Well, sometimes they're pretty wild and they're pretty bad. You know,
well,
if it's things that are relating to race,
yeah, yeah.
you're taking a big risk, you know, looking at the comments.
Well,
Uh,
that's probably why. Let's say a New York Times pick. Okay, here's Fred Galvez one more time. Filipino nurses and frontline health workers in the U.S. have paid a disproportionate price during the pandemic, mainly because of their self-sacrifice and dedication to their chosen vocation, ingrained traits most people are unaware of, but most Filipinos who grew up in the Philippines understand.
that's kind of true, but it's also dangerous.
Yeah. Well,
When you start
because
talking about ingrained traits, right? You're
oh
moving
yeah.
in a direction
Oh yeah,
of
I'm destined to be a nurse. I have it.
yeah. Uh, well,
That's what they
you're
mean, right?
yeah, sometimes,
Um,
but it can work the other way too. I mean, one of my favorite comments from a white landowner about Filipino farm workers was, "You gotta love the Filipinos because they are so great. They'll take their shirt right off their backs for you if you ask them."
I
And
won't take my shirt off, but maybe my best. I take my best off.
so that's an example of what I call liberal racism, and I'm not accusing Fred of that,
Yeah.
but I'm saying you got to watch out when you start saying it's an ingrained trait, right? Because then people start talking genetic talk, and when they talk genetic talk, you're talking racial
Hey,
discrimination.
but this is why I'm not a football player because I have certain traits to be a football player.
Well, it's genetically true that most of us are a little shorter than most white and black people, so
And that's
that
why
may
I
be
love
the reason.
that's why I love basketball. I love the basket. Oh, look.
I got it. Well, you know, some Filipinos could jump, so that makes up for the difference, right? You
So look, all right. So once again, see, there's basket. Well, these are double
know.
basket. So once again, we talk about the comments here in the New York Times. It's interesting, and once again it's in the nurse article in the New York Times.
Yep.
We talk about it because we're talking about the COVID map.
Well,
All
there's
right,
a lot of other people. I mean, they did a really good job. They got a broad perspective from several working nurses, and you know, nurses where, like I have other cousins with on my wife's side, where both of the man and wife, right, are both nurses. So
yeah.
that's not rare at all
Well,
in
well
our community.
let's just say this about the New York Times. I know they've done other stories a little bit, but back in April, May, the LA Times did a big story. The Boston Globe did a story, and I know that because they included me as a source and included the nurse that I have been was my source. And so I think that these are it's important though, whether although it's a little late in the game, but it's a critical time. It's better late than never. They're in the second wave, and by golly, they're right to do it because look at the second wave when we were back here and it was bad, right? We were talking about it back here and it was still pretty bad, and no one. And then all throughout here, right? April, May. This is when Trump was saying kung flu and China virus and all that.
Oh man. Oh
Yeah,
man.
and it was bad in terms of for other reasons. People were coming after us, but now look at where we are now. We need to be vigilant. We need to be understanding. We need to know where we are in the current, where the trends are. And I think we understand that because we've been shut down. We've been shut
Yeah.
down here at the museum. Okay,
Yeah.
Dan. Now let's move on to if people are listening and say, "Come on, Emil, you've been on for an hour," I want to thank Letty Perez. Letty Perez is a board member at
Manangati.
Le-
Happy birthday,
Leatrice Perez, and I want to go here to Leatrice Perez with her husband Frank. They
Frank.
wrote a
Yeah.
book, and they were they were honored by being mentioned in Dawn Don Boholano Mabalon's book, Little Manila's in the Heart. And here's a quote from Little Manila's in the Heart that mentions Letty. It was all a family could afford to pay for one to have a chance at a better life in America, with the hope that the rest of the family could follow. When Frank Perez left Bantay in Ilocos Sur in the late 1920s, his family sold a water buffalo, a cow, and part of their land to pay for his fare. After a brief stint in Los Angeles, Frank Perez settled in Stockton during World War II, where he met and married Letty Bantillo in 1948. And so that really is, I mean, I honor Letty and say happy birthday, Letty. She's a board member of the FANHS Museum. And her story really encapsulates the story of the people we were just talking about, the nurses who came here for a better life, right? They came here for jobs. But this is also a generation, several generations prior, because this really mirrors my father's story, my story. My father sounds just like Frank Perez. He came in the 20s, the late 20s. My father was in Ilocos Norte, not in Bantay, Ilocos Sur. But I'm wondering now, after reading Frank's, uh, his this excerpt, I'm wondering how many cows, how many water buffaloes my dad's family had to sell, for him to get here with his brother. I don't think they had any cows. I know they might have. They might have had a. I hope they didn't sell a water buffalo for America or a cow or part of their land to pay for the
Well,
fare.
they got, if Frank, I know both Frank and Letty as well, and I've done a partial interview on Letty, which I would like to resume, but Frank unfortunately passed away before I was able to interview him fully. But there's been some writing on his history, and if the families did not have a water buffalo or goats or pigs to sell, they usually took up a collection within the family from cousins. So it wasn't just the nuclear family that was contributing to paying for the fare.
Yeah.
It was sometimes a more collective, more widely collective effort to get money.
So in
And
other
they got paid. They got we have to emphasize they got paid in return by
right,
continuous remittances
right, they would send money
to the
back.
Philippines.
And look, consider how this has transfers over from, if you're from, like my father's from Loag. So if you were in Loag and you do not forget, right? If you took a collection there in Loag to get to America,
Mhm.
you did not forget once you got to America the importance of community, the
Yep.
importance of being the United Laogaños of Northern California, in that case, in my case, San Francisco or Northern California. And that mutual aid society, instead of life insurance, which some could or couldn't afford, as well as I, after you go to the rosary, where it was in my family, in my circle, it was Mr. Mata. People who are listening might say, "Oh, I know Mr. Mata. Yeah, he had the crew cut, he had the flat top." Mr. Mata would lead the rosary, and then after the rosary, families would distribute little envelopes to the
Right.
widow or
Right.
the survivors.
Was that the Mata family that lived on the in the Fillmore around Pierce Street?
Yeah.
Pier-
These are the
And eight,
Mata.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He had a daughter. His oldest daughter, I think, was Merle.
yeah. Well, I
She's a
think that
friend. Yeah,
they all had roots between Stockton and San Francisco because, like I said, we went to Stockton for the vegetables
sure,
and the
sure.
lechon, and then we went back.
And Salinas. It was Stockton, Salinas, San Francisco.
Yeah. So
Uh,
the whole idea of the mutual aid society continued in San Francisco, and uh,
Absolutely.
it here's the thing, and this is I think another part of our history. It stayed strong until the next generation, the second generation, outlived it
Yeah.
and went elsewhere, right? Because for whatever reason, the Laogueños. I mean, there's still some nuclear within the nuclear family, and you know, I don't know what we got. Did we get Americanized, Dan? Because that's where we
Yeah.
met.
We
We met as
yes, we did.
second generation
Yes, we
folks
did.
within a Filipino organization. In our case, I think it was the Optimists. I think with the
Right.
Optimists,
Right.
the Richmond
Well,
Optimists.
even by the time of the third generation, 1970s, by the time they were being born, even the big fraternal organizations
Yeah,
that were at the core of cultural and most importantly political leadership, like the Gran Oriente, the
oh yeah,
Caballeros de Dimasalang,
yeah.
Legionarios del Trabajo, even they started suffering not attrition, but a lack of recruitment of enough younger generation people. So
It's really because the story or the narrative kind of ends, right? I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
I remember when I was a reporter in Stockton, covering, and this is how I got to know Dawn and Dylan Delvo, her cohort, and how I got to know FANHS and Fred Cordova because I
yeah,
covered a big dinner where they honored Fred in
yeah,
Stock his home, but and I got to know Ernie Mabalon, who was he was a legionario, right?
yeah.
I got to know
No,
all
he was a
these,
GO too.
right? Yeah, he was, but I knew all of these guys because of uh, their their narratives, which included these organizations, and the narrative. So unwittingly to me, I by writing about them, I was spreading the narrative to a new generation, but I don't know if the new generation really picked it up because there was that drive for new members, and I don't think it was very successful because we see attrition, we see the dropping of the narrative slightly, and we
Yeah,
don't see
yeah,
the liveliness of the groups as much as we did in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and so on.
yeah,
And I used to remember, I used to recall, I talked to Ernie once. I said, why would anyone want to join the Rondo Oriente, or the Legionarios? Why would anyone want to join them? He said, you know, any place you go, you got a place to stay. He said, you are
yeah.
welcome anywhere. You're welcome by any, wherever there was a brother, right?
Right. That's
Well,
right.
welcome. And that sense of community, now it's a shame we look back at that as a historical moment, a historical point, because we look at it presently, and I don't know if you could say that necessarily.
Well,
You know,
there was also a change among Filipino immigrants themselves. In the Philippines, on several of my visits there, both on business and on just family visits, but particularly on when we're representing the university, San Francisco State or some other organization state-wise. I was invited to dinners and asked to speak at fraternal organization dinners, and they were Lions Club and
yeah.
Rotary Club. That
Yeah.
Rosary Rotary Club. What was that?
Different Filipino
A
club.
Catholic slip? Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, Rotary Club. So there are these Western based organizations,
Colonial, colonial, right?
that, well, I guess so, but the point, I rather than look at them as colonial, because even if you look at the structure
Yeah,
of LDTGO and the CDA, they're also colonial because their
yeah,
structure was following the secret society fraternal structure, that
yeah.
was the pattern in Europe, and
That's right.
the European craftsmen and the elite.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
look, Dan, um, I don't know what Frank was or Letty. I'm sure they were something, but I, I, I just want to bring us back to Frank and Letty. Letty's birthday.
Well,
She's
Frank would help,
92.
was one of the writers that was recruited by Romulo
Oh
to
yeah,
work on the U.S. UN Charter. A lot of people
yeah,
don't know that. I mean, that was one of the things that I wanted to interview Frank about. You know,
yeah. Well, that
Alex Fabro. I
I
mean,
knew.
Alex Fabros may have gotten an interview out of him. I'm not sure. Got
See,
to
I
check.
knew of Frank. I knew of Frank, but I don't. I did not engage much with him, and I am honored and privileged to serve on the FANHS Museum Board with his wife, his widow, Letty. But I do want to honor Letty. She's 92 this week.
Woohoo!
Letty, happy birthday to you. Happy
Happy
birthday
birthday,
to you.
Letty.
Happy
Manang
birthday,
Yeti.
dear Manang Letty. Happy birthday to you. And we'll next board meeting. So we read from this book, which is Dawn Mabalon's Little Manila is in the Heart. Letty is quoted in it. And so we thank Letty and thank you, Dan, for adding the stories about Frank and Letty. And she's a double L Filipino too. She's an LY. I'm going to have to ask her, Letty, do you say Bantilio or Bantillo?
Bantillo. Yeah, yeah.
She, I would say I didn't know she was a Bantilio, but I bet you she says Bantilio and not Bantillo.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I probably right. You're probably right.
Yeah. But I mean, but this whole thing between Frank coming from Ilocos to marrying, settling in Stockton after, during World War II and meeting Eddie in 1948. That's similar to my father. My father came in the 20s, did not go to the war, but stayed in San Francisco and met my mother in San Francisco in the 50s. So you see the patterns. You see the patterns in people's stories. We tell these stories at the Filipino American National History Society Museum. The story, because the museum is where you are. Figure out your story. Contact us. Tell me your story. Come on the Zoom like me and Dan. I mean, we'll talk about your story. You can email me at emilamok, EMILAMOK at gmail.com, EMILAMOK at gmail.com, and we'll tell your story. Anyway, happy birthday to Letty. Um, and there's a couple other things before we leave, Dan. Another story. This was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. How the left hijacked civil rights. Uh, I, I,
Oh.
this is a provocative title for an opinion piece. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal because I want to see what other people say, and I mention this here because and you're laughing, and that's what I expected. I mention this here because we're in MLK weekend. We honor MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. And if and there's no laugh there, you're not mocking that, but we do honor Martin Luther King Jr. But um,
Yeah, but
one of the
they're dishonoring him.
well, wait
By
a minute, wait,
publishing this, they're dishonoring him. They
they're
put his
not.
picture up. They put his picture up, and on his, and then they're
Look,
showing two of the strongest supporters. Right? You got
Dan,
Smith, and you
hold
got.
on, hold on. Let me just tell you why I did it. I
Oh
I,
no,
I
I
did
think
it.
it's a good idea.
I did it as a point of discussion because look, this is written by the notorious conservative Robert Woodson. And I don't know Joshua Mitchell, but Woodson I know from all his days when I was in Washington as, he and just imagine Clarence Thomas and Thomas Sewell and, where
Oh
Robert
man,
Woodson stands. And so,
you got
and,
all the right guys, that's for sure.
fairly conservative African American thinker. Um, and,
Let's give it
and
a
that's
lot of
why the
credit to
title.
Thomas Sowell that he really doesn't deserve. I mean, his stuff is pretty
Well,
shallow.
I'm just saying that as a journalist, that's who I am.
Yeah, no,
I'm a journalist.
I have to refer to Sowell too, but I refer to him
Okay.
as a shallow thinker.
But I say that they put out these provocative things, how the left hijacks civil rights, and we'll go into it in a second. But let me just say that, excuse me, African Americans and Filipino Americans are really hand in hand.
Yes, they are.
I say that knowing how racist some Filipino Americans have been toward blacks.
Yes,
I mean, and that is also a parallel reality. It's
yes.
unfortunate that I always saw it as one of our blind spots as a community, but really, Dan, what explain? We'll go back to the article in a second. But what explains this conflict where every Filipino kid growing up, if you're of a certain age, like my family lived in all the black areas in San Francisco, the Fillmore, Western Addition, the South of Market. We finally moved to the Mission. That was seen as we are moving on up. We get to live with immigrant Hispanics and working class whites now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In the Mission. And then we moved out to the Richmond, where now we can live with Asian Americans, Chinese, right? But you know, the beginning, we were renting and lived in black African American areas, Western Addition, the Panhandle, the Fillmore. So, and yet I would hear other Filipinos say things like, oh, they'll say bad words about the bad word that means black, right? The bad word in Ilocano and Tagalog. I'd hear it in several dialects. And they would
Oh yeah,
be,
oh yeah.
in retrospect, it would sound racist as heck, but they said it. And yet here we were in this community, an African American community. I always saw it as a conflict. Tell me, Mr. Historian, Professor, what explains this conflict
I'm
that
more of a political scientist than a historian, but I'll let it sway right now. You know, you're the historian, so don't
okay,
stick that
all
label
right,
on my forehead.
as a political historian, how does it work out that there's this conflict?
Well, first of all, some of the attitude that Filipinos had towards blacks is actually born in the Philippines. Okay. It's pretty obvious that Filipinos have a literally self denigrating side where darker people are lesser than lighter people. And the
Uh,
mestizo, particularly those of European mix, white American mix, and then Chinese
uh,
mix, have higher status. They actually do have higher social and economic status in the Philippines. So the darker versus lighter, and with the darker being the inferior, right, is an element that comes from the Philippines itself. Secondly, um, white colonials, okay, particularly members of the military, right, that went to the Philippines to put down the so-called insurrection, which was later renamed the incorrectly, right, the Philippine American War. It should be called the U.S. Philippines War. Um, they were racist as hell, and
right.
the racism was really clear from them in terms of the slaughter of Filipinos and the kind of letters that they sent back to the United States that documented to their families. And they would say, I put another 10 N word, in the side, this is an actual letter that I wrote, from somebody that was in one of the Ohio regiments that was sent to the Philippines.
Right.
That I
Terribly
read
racist.
rather.
Terribly racist. And
Yeah, absolutely racist. And
and
so that
ironically, the
that sets up a
soldiers,
status,
yeah,
right? And that status is reflected even in the leadership attitude among the future leaders of the independent nation of the Philippines, or at least titularly independent nation of the Philippines.
yeah,
So immigrants come over with a darker versus light attitude, and they immediately embrace the white racist attitude against all darker peoples here, particularly Black Americans, because that's the prevalent value. It's weird saying it's a value, right? Because now people see it as a sin, right? Yeah, but it was a
yeah,
value to be racist. People wanted to be racist. What do you think
yeah,
about the people who were racist, the invaders of the Capitol? They want to be racist. Carrying in the Confederate flag into the building, and saying outright. I mean, people saying things like they're supposed to be shooting BLM, not macing me. Things like, they're absolutely racist. And that's today, after all of the successes that we have had in trying to fight for fairness and equal rights and less bias and less racism. That's today. So even today, there are going to be Filipinos that still subscribe to the white racist value set because they believe in it. Why did
yeah,
they vote for Trump? They believe the stuff. Okay. And there's no
yeah.
amount of education that is going to change the minds of people that are that steadfast in their belief. That's what you got to understand. So
Well,
there it
I
is.
look,
There's the history of it. There's the
yeah.
culture of it. Right?
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. And
There's another
because that,
side, though. There's the
yeah.
side where we actually cooperate and work with African Americans. And that's in my opinion, that's even more important because it shows you the positive direction that we can all move in,
Yeah.
and on common ground. So there are, but that's the minority. I would say that's the minority of Filipinos who bother to see the commonality that we have with African
Well,
Americans and
the
who are
common
willing
ground,
to work with them.
the common ground is rich, right? I mean, we're brought
Very
over
rich.
as replacement labor essentially, and uh, and we go through the same sort of things. When we see signs in Stockton that say no Filipinos allowed, we should see that as a form of Asian American Jim Crow. When we see, the discrimination that we felt as immigrants coming over, we should see, that it's clear, uh, the pattern is there. Sometimes we look to separate ourselves. Oh, we were American nationals, or we were whatever. We aren't
Yeah,
black,
yeah.
but
We're not like
that's
them.
we're not like them. We're not. We're good other, not bad other. Well, here is
Yeah.
something that something that was shared with us. Terry Torres mentions that Letty was born in Stockton to one of the pioneer
That's right.
Filipino family, so she
Yeah,
was not an immigrant. But
that's right.
this this speaks to what Peter Jamero was saying yesterday on this program. Or I was talking with Peter, and Peter is roughly the same age as Letty. He's like a couple years younger, but he was also one of the first, right, of Filipino Americans, American born to Filipino immigrants, right?
Yes.
And Frank was the immigrant. Frank Perez was the immigrant who came to America, moved to Stockton, married Letty. Letty, her parents actually were like Frank. They came to America as,
Right.
as nationals and settled in Stockton. Letty was born here in America. She met Frank. And so
Right.
that's a clarification of Letty's story. Didn't exactly come clear in Dawn's book, as she just said they met, but
Yeah.
the clarification is noted. She was an American born, but like what
Hmm.
what Peter said yesterday, it goes to show you that if you were an American born, a second generation, right? You were treated the same as the first generation, the
Oh,
immigrant itself.
absolutely. Yeah, it was always a
And
big surprise. All right, wow, you speak English so well.
yeah,
And usually I would answer them with some kind of vulgar epithet.
yeah. Well, the same here with me, right? And they were figuring that, oh well, you were, you know, you might have come here as a young child because of the '65 Immigration Act or something. No, I was born here. I was born
Mhm.
in America. That's why I sound like Dick Clark. I sound like Dick Clark. I sound like the big DJs. So no, that was, but that's part of our history too. That's part of our history too. And I appreciate you bringing up the whole thing about the racism because uh, a lot of people they don't get it. They don't, and they don't get it, or
They don't want to get it.
they don't
They
want
want to have somebody to inferiorize. It makes them feel powerful.
even in our community. You're saying
Yes,
even
absolutely.
in our community,
Absolutely.
and
There's
that's
anti-Chinese racism,
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know. The and that's because Chinese represent an element of power,
yeah,
right, in the Philippines that is exclusive, at least from the perspective of people who are really critical of it. There's no denying it, right? That a lot of the wealthiest families in the Philippines are almost absolutely and of Chinese ancestry, or exclusively of Chinese ancestry, and it's really obvious. I mean, when you go into the wealthier neighborhoods, you see a variety of Chinese religious
yeah,
temples.
yeah.
So it's kind of obvious.
Yeah. Well, let's bring this up. Let's bring the racism within us up during maybe February is Black History Month. We'll be able to bring it up and talk about.
Well, I would be really happy to do that. But I would also say that we need to balance it out by showing places and times where we have been cooperative
Oh yeah,
with
look,
African American.
we are cooperative. Definitely have, and I have family cooperative to the fact that we have brought them into our families,
Right
right?
on, right
We've
on.
intermarriages. Um, and we both face anti-miscegenation.
Right.
So I think that definitely it's the idea is not that Filipinos are racist, but it's the idea that the Black Filipino relationship is complex
Right.
and it's whole, and we'll explore it all in February. But I want to get back to this article, how the left hijacked civil rights.
Please.
Well, because we're here talking about Martin Luther King and Black and Filipino solidarity or Black and Filipino conflict. Here's the article. What's interesting is it talks about King, and it's very reverent about King and how he offered, how he went and went to he went to students in Greensboro and he preached nonviolence, and it's great. And he says how King paid a heavy price for his hope that America was redeemable. He had his home bombed once, his or twice. His home was bombed. His wife and daughter were nearly killed. So it goes on about here's Martin Luther King and what he did. He united Black Americans behind the proposition that racism is evil in itself, not simply because white people visited it upon blacks, and that all must unite to combat evil. He warned us about the self-destructive path of violence. So basically, it reveres his nonviolence attitude. But this is where the article kind of talks about the left hijacking uh, civil
Yeah,
rights.
that next paragraph that starts with today is heavily loaded.
Yeah, he says one of the original arguments about slavery is that blacks were morally inferior and thus incapable of self-government. The article quotes John C. Calhoun, but then we get to
That's another real winner.
yeah, we get to the
Today,
real
that one.
today. Many black
That's the
leaders,
one. That's the paragraph.
angry white progressives who make the same arguments about blacks' lack of moral agency, reject the country's founding principles, and seek to undermine its institutions. Now that is a real loaded paragraph right there. Because,
That's a hell of a
because
topic sentence, don't you think?
yeah, yeah, blacks lack moral agency. Nah, not really. Reject the country's founding principles. I don't think so.
No, in fact,
Yeah,
they're quite the opposite.
yeah. Seek to
Both the white progressives and the blacks are quite the opposite of that statement. I mean,
or how about
that is a that is a 180-degree idiotic statement. I mean, that is
or
absolutely the opposite of reality.
how about this? Seek to
Do you
undermine.
personally? Let me ask you. Okay,
Yeah,
you've been in contact with a whole lot of liberal folks that are in the media and in what is chastised as the permanently and absolutely liberal media, right? You know,
yeah.
how many white progressives do you know that that say blacks in any way, you know, secretly or publicly, lack moral agency? How many white progressives do you know that do that? You
I
know.
yeah. See, this is the thing. Oh, this is the thing about reading op-eds in the Wall Street Journal because it tells you where conservative thought is among minorities, and
It
we
tells you where
know.
capitalism is.
Well, yes, capitalism, but well, yes, and I'll get to that point too. But look at where Filipinos are, right? The Filipinos who were pro-Trump, the Filipinos who are, more conservative, it all has to do with class and not race. And then they bring in race and they say, hey, blacks lack moral agency, reject the country's founding principles, seek to undermine its institutions. Not necessarily. Now, here's the other point. It says here, the leaders of these movements insist that every inequity suffered by blacks is caused by institutional and structural racism,
And
and
that's
that
correct. Which is
right,
correct.
it is correct, and that they have no power to liberate themselves, and that they will remain oppressed until white people change. Well, that's kind of correct too.
That's
Even to
true.
raise,
That's correct too. The only part that's wrong with that sentence is that they have no power to liberate themselves.
yeah,
Okay. The rest of it is happens to be true.
yeah, even to raise the issue of what role self-determination plays for blacks earns you the label of racist. Well, we've just
Wow.
debunked his
Wow.
statement.
Guess what?
We
Okay. Okay. Here, I'm going to show you this. This is my fist. This is
uh,
during the strike at SF State. And guess
uh,
what? One of our rallying cries were
what
self determination. All
well,
power to the people. Self determination. Okay. So that's
so there so
idiotic.
so all right. So well, what you're not self-determination, but what you're saying, what this guy is saying. All right, now continue on into this is a Wall Street Journal commentary, an op-ed that was published on Saturday by Robert Woodson Jr. Civil rights quote civil rights organizations and their leadership, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus, need to wake up before it's too late. A faction of black leaders have been silent about or complicit in the takeover of the civil rights movement by the radical left. The effect of this is not to glorify black achievement, but to crucify low income blacks who are represented in national media outlets by their worst behaved members and bear the brunt of the attacks by the woke radical left on the cities where they live. Wow. So what they're saying is, hey, let's glorify black achievement, because what we're doing is we're putting the worst of black pathology out there, and that's bad. Uh, this is to quote essentially to paraphrase this column that was written in the Wall Street Journal. Justice for Black America cannot be achieved by framing it solely through the distorted lens of the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others in fatal police encounters. For every unarmed Black American killed by the police, hundreds are killed in neighborhood homicides. See, I don't agree with that either. I mean, what they're trying to say is let us. He's trying to debunk what he believes is the distorted lens of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which is not
How is that
right.
distorted? How
Well,
is
right,
almost 9 minutes of a cop kneeling on a guy's neck until he dies? How is that
right.
distorted?
Well, see,
You
this is
know?
the thing. This is where some of us depart from Robert Woodson in this editorial. He's a very infamous black conservative. Here's the column that I think is sort of where his prescription. He says, like all Americans, blacks have triumphed over their circumstances only when they have adopted bourgeois virtues such as hard work, respect for learning, self-discipline, faith, and personal responsibility. So here, bourgeois value in the 19th century, Frederick Douglass found reading to be the key to his own personal liberation amid slavery, and he understood that whites deliberately withheld literacy from blacks precisely because it was so valuable. Bourgeois values drove blacks to build the powerful religious, fraternal,
That's the
and other
capitalism.
associations
The
that helped
champion
them
of capitalism.
days of Jim Crow and cultivated the essential virtues in the next generation. Okay, so look, I point this out to you because here is the other side of Martin Luther King Day. Many of us will
Yeah.
just revere the day for let's praise the nonviolence and let's praise the broad vision of Martin Luther King to be inclusive of all of us. But of course, Wall Street Journal opinion, they've got to say that, hey, there's this other side and that he was hijacked by the left. And now, just in talking about it, we can see how ridiculous it is. But you can read it for yourself and have your own opinion. Robert L. Woodson,
Yeah,
senior
well,
level, said,
MLK Jr. was hijacked. Okay, so what was his position on the Vietnam War? He was not just anti-war. Okay, he
no,
connected capitalism, wrong-headed capitalism, bad capitalism, with the Vietnam War and with class issues, right?
yeah,
In the U.S. because he started moving away from a race only kind of perspective, which he never really had. It wasn't all. It just happened to be that American media and American society saw it as a race only issue, right? That this applies to blacks. But his analysis always had a class element in it, and it always, he was talking about poverty all the time. What are the root causes of poverty? Okay. And race was associated with that, of course.
yeah.
But the root causes of poverty is the system, the structural nature of the way capitalism is practiced in American society. So I got to be careful here, okay? Because I am not an absolutist anti-capitalist. I think there's good capitalism, there's bad capitalism. But what has been happening, especially since the Reagan era, okay, is a turn towards the enrichment of the uppermost 2% of society, even half of 1%, as some people like to describe it, right?
Yeah.
And to the disadvantage, right, of the 90% in American society.
All right. So one thing we can agree on, well, we agree on a lot. We dislike this article. We dislike this article that says how the left hijacked civil rights. It didn't hijack civil rights.
What's in his Son of Soul? I mean, that's.
Yeah. So, but the point is, look, because I'm not an absolute anti-capitalist either. There's good capital and there's bad capital. People make choices. Do you want to
That's right.
become a hedge fund runner and make billions of dollars, or do you want to dedicate your life to more meaningful things, maybe slightly on the more spiritual side that helps society broadly? I mean, there's all sorts of ways. Do you want to become part of a hedge fund that's a for-profit, or do you want to work for nonprofits? In your life.
Yeah,
Um,
well, those are almost absolute oppositional positions, right? Absolute oppositional situations, and I think it's uh, it's not that black and white. No pun intended. I think
yeah, well, I just
because you
wanted to
got to
get
look
some.
at people like Gates,
Yeah.
okay, and
Well,
Buffett,
later
and
on,
Gates
yeah,
and
later.
Buffett,
Yeah.
major
Well,
donations, right?
well,
I don't like everything that Gates does with his money, but
yeah.
obviously these multi-billionaires have been giving back to society in ways that they think are best achieve what we need.
In the way that capitalism allows for philanthropy to act as penance for things that you do wrong to get your money. So, Bill Gates is allowed to be a monopolist, and then he's allowed to give some money to the thing that he wants to make the world a better place. And probably it's not his ideas totally; it's probably his wife's, Melinda's as well, or probably more so. So I don't think it's what I was saying before is in opposition. I think that they can work together. It just depends on the capitalist you're dealing with. But now here's the thing I was trying to get at. There's good capitalism and there is bad capitalism, like the capitalists on January 6th. They were bad capitalists because they destroyed the capital, and that's a bad thing.
Oh, oh no. Oh
And
no.
it,
What is
it
that
works.
smell?
It works as a segue to our final thing that I said we were going to talk about, and that is this is the last weekend of Trump. And just to give people a sense, I want this to be like a shorter 15-minute. This is like the Filipino party where you start saying your goodbyes because it's going to take a while.
Damn.
So you start saying your goodbyes early. So
Yeah,
this
well,
is the
okay.
last weekend. This is the last weekend of Trump, and boy, I don't. And we, we come out of impeachment, we go into another I word, the inaugural, and we, I don't. Usually, I feel good about inaugurals, any kind of inaugural, right? Because it's a happy time. But this is so for some reason it doesn't feel happy. It feels like we should be fearful because of what's being reported about state capitals, what's being reported about what's going to happen at 20,000 troops or more in the actual in Washington D.C. So, what are your thoughts as we approach this big week where we're talking about the end of Trump and the beginning of Biden at the inaugural?
You know, I don't know. I understand the Democrats want to have some sense of celebration, however muted it might be, and people coming out and wanting to commemorate the fact that a new administration and most importantly, a new set of values, right? And a reassertion of classic American values, right? And a recommitment to the truly liberal elements, right?
Yeah,
Of American political ideology. And it's true. We need to celebrate that and commemorate that. But for me, it's overshadowed by the likelihood that there's going to be continuing forms of guerrilla warfare
yeah,
coming from armed right extremists. And I don't expect them to show up in uncontrollable numbers, or I don't expect a gunfight at the Capitol. I think there may be some individual or small group activities that require a resort to lethal force. I hope not. You're not going to see the kind of crowds that we saw on the 6th.
yeah.
But
You don't need that
they
big a crowd.
will,
You don't need that big a crowd,
you
right?
don't, you don't. Well, that's been proven.
Yeah,
But now they've got enough of a perimeter. In fact, they've got like a triple perimeter at this point in DC. I'm more concerned about the potential for attacks at the state capitals.
yeah,
I was looking even at Sacramento's perimeter and the kind of devices they're using to protect that perimeter. It isn't wide enough, in my opinion.
yeah,
I've never been military, but my undergraduate major was in political science and international relations.
yeah.
And it says on my diploma, theories of revolution and war. That's what it actually says on my diploma.
So
And
we're a
so
little
I
too
am I
close up.
am very much a student of how revolutions and wars are waged. And I've always been into the issue of police and military security, because I always believed that it might be necessary, uh, both from radicalism, armed rebellion from either the left or the right. But my greatest concern as a veteran of the San Francisco State Strike was police abuse,
Yeah,
police abuse of power, misuse of military power. It's always been on my mind, and all of my colleagues who were also surviving veterans of the SF State Strike will agree with me, except for those that were anti-strike and obviously very rightist in their perspective, and they're still there. They still
yeah.
contradict all of the facts that come out historically about the strike, about Hayakawa and everybody else, they still contradict that. They still cling to the same statements that they made back in 68 and 69. And I don't expect them to change. We have the same issue with this current generation of right-wing extremists. American society was moved, the center of American society was moved way over to the right, okay? Beginning with Richard Nixon, even though he was a moderate, relatively moderate
All right,
person on the right.
bring us back
Wait,
to
wait.
today, though, Dan. What
Which
happened?
day? Which day?
To like coming up
Oh,
now,
today, today, the present. Oh,
so,
okay. Okay, yeah. Now,
so are we?
that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing. So you have now extremists that have been a steady, they've been living, they've been nourished by a steady diet of right-wing thinking,
Yeah,
okay, for in public, out in the open, at least since the Nixon era, and especially during the Reagan era.
yeah,
Remember how they disposed of immigrants? You know, refugees. Clearly, there's wars
yeah.
going on in Central America, and people were fleeing active wars. They weren't fleeing gangs and drugs as much as active, ideologically driven, and CIA influenced, right? Russian influenced, Chinese influenced in Africa as well, right? War and rebellions. And so they were true refugees. And they were being sent back in the thousands
Right.
all throughout the 12-year period of Reagan and Bush,
So
right? Bush Sr.
where does this leave us now, Dan? I mean, because it seems to me now that we have
Well, okay,
these
is anti-immigrant. First of all, anti-immigrant. Look how bad that got. It
yeah,
got all the way to family separation,
right.
right? Okay.
After
Um,
years of family unity was
yeah,
right.
that's right. That's right. That was the value. Okay. How about the effects of 9/11, not only against Muslims, but what about the Patriot Act
Yeah,
and how that was used and coupled with anti-gang activity? So that here in California, California had its own Patriot Act, right? Okay. And that was coupled with anti-gang positions so that kids who were not even in gangs were being accused of being in gangs so that they could be also targeted for prosecution by district attorneys who want to make a name for themselves, right? And tying them to terrorism. So the Patriot Act got abused by associating gang activity with terrorism
right.
and lengthening people's sentences and all that.
All right.
So all of this has been going on and on and on and on. How about three strikes, you're out? What
Well,
was that?
all right,
Three strikes,
all right.
life in
I'm going to
prison.
rein you in here, Dan. Here, I'm going to rein you in a little bit because it seems that we got this situation. We have these. Yes, the radicals have been nurturing, right? They've been incubating. Some of these ideas have gone up to the policy level and have changed policy. So now we have a new era where there is truth and no one can agree on what truth is, right? I mean, basically, it goes back to what we were discussing at the beginning of our
Yeah, sure.
conversation.
Because they're getting support for not what is not true. So as
Right.
long as they get validation, right, they can continue to believe what they're believing and they can continue to act in exactly the direction they've been moving. Okay.
So how do we get out of this thing where we got smart people looking at the truth, right? And they make policy, but then we have these, we have these fringe folks who are no longer fringe, but they are the ones who the radical right that has been, that has been fed
From
by
the
Trump.
extreme from the extreme radical right, I fear violence.
Yeah,
But from the less radical right, I fear a continuation of the same kinds of positions they've been taking on all the issues, starting at the top with anti-big government, right? Okay. One of the reasons that people are really dissatisfied with government because it's too small. It's too small in the wrong places.
it,
Okay.
it,
It's
it,
big in some places and it's small in other places. The places where it's big are where there's been deregulation, for example.
right.
Okay. So government has let go of most regulations or disposed of them, many of them within this short 4-year period that Mr. Trump has been in office, right? But that tendency has been there for 70 years, ever since the Second World War. Okay, so you got to put that in perspective. Now, so I'm not that worried about violence coming from the lesser gun-prone population that still are on the right. I don't think all the evangelicals are that gun prone or that rightist, but they're still there. That element of conservatism is still there, and it's going to continue to be there. So what has to happen is there have to be justice must be seen to be done. One of the things that wasn't done when Nixon was pardoned was the Democrats made no moves to qualify the use of the pardon power. Okay? Made no moves. Now they're talking about that possibility. Even when Trump was talking about using the pardon power in the way that he was talking about, and he's been doing that for a couple of years, nobody said boo.
All right.
Okay.
Look, we got to.
So here we are.
You said the magic word, which is pardon, which is the next thing I want to talk about, because are we getting into what is the pardon shot for
okay, the
Trump?
craziest possibility is that he pardons everybody who gets charged with anything for the invasion of the Capitol. That's the craziest shot. It ain't gonna work. He might try it, but it ain't gonna work. Okay. The medium
for himself and his family.
Yeah, that's where there's a median point, and that himself and his family, that's clear. How far will he go towards the people who, like, not even Giuliani, but other people that have clearly been pro-Trump, okay, and might have some kind of legal liability, not necessarily criminal, but maybe just civil, right? Will he pardon those? And so it's a question of how far he will take this power. So hopefully there will be a bilateral position. I don't expect much from Republicans, but a few Republicans will indeed move towards qualifying the pardon power. Now, the question is, how much, what will it take? Will a Supreme Court decision with some useful dicta, right, establish the rule? Now, remember, one of the right-wing elements, right, the conservative elements, even moderate conservative elements, has always been, we hate it when the court makes law, right? They say that all the time. This is judge-made legislation, right? What the hell do you think the court's for, you idiots? Remember Ed Meese during the Reagan administration? He said the Supreme Court is not necessarily the highest arbiter of the law. And everybody said, shut up, Ed. What an idiot. And by the way, he's California, and he was previously AG with the Bechtel company. Yeah,
He was an East Bay resident. Well, look, Dan, this is all important stuff, but I think we should save it for another time. We've gone a while, and we've covered all the main bases.
Okay, yeah, we have.
Impeachment, we'll cover more when the Congress gets back in session on the 9th. I guess they come back on the 19th, but they probably are going to come back and have the Democratic control census to see if there's any kind of removal or disqualification.
Yeah, finish it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would, what I would like to see? I'd like to see them take their time. I think Pelosi ought to put it on the table before Mitch is no longer majority leader in the Senate. However, I think they ought to let it sit, let the investigations go on, because the more of the investigations on the Capitol invasion, right, the insurrection go on, the better chances of getting some strong convictions all the way across the board, including the possibility of incitement, right, charges, incitement of insurrection charges against everybody from the outgoing president on down. So I like delaying that. I also like that because I would like to see what happens with my fear, again, that there are going to be local kind of guerrilla, right wing extremist terrorist threats all over the country.
Hey,
It's not going to just be Oklahoma City. It's going to be a whole lot of problems.
we've seen this. We've seen this, happening. All little things like Portland. Once Portland was going on, you know,
Yeah,
uh, you know, uh, did we hear a lot about it at first? No. But what if consider a scenario over the next couple of weeks where there's a Portland, there's a Madison, Wisconsin, there's an Oklahoma City, there's
Seattle.
a Seattle, all
Yeah,
going on at once. There's a California,
right.
all going on at once,
Yeah,
and there won't be enough CNN correspondents to cover it all because
yeah,
it just, uh, you know,
yeah.
that's the prospects of where we are. How about look? We haven't really talked about Trump's final days, but let's end it this way with one question, a really quick answer in terms of did Filipinos benefit because of the Filipino Americans? Do they benefit because of the presidency of Donald Trump? Historically, do you think it'll go back? People will say, "Oh, yeah, we did okay. I got my $600 in a debit card this week. I did okay." I mean, what do you
I
think?
think I think I think the majority of Filipinos who have an accurate sense of our socioeconomic and cultural condition will think that we did not benefit from Mr. Trump. But I think there's going to be a substantial minority who will think that we benefited from Mr. Trump. In my discussions with people from other ethnic groups, Asian ethnic groups, they have said, "Yeah, man, there's a lot of people, a minority, but a large minority in my community that believe that Trump was good for the economy." And I said, "Well, are they citing something in specific, right, in terms of their personal gains from the economy?" And they said, well, a lot of them, because they lived in a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood, said, my 401k is kicking butt, right? So they're looking at how much money they're making off the market. They may be investors rather than just having mutual funds or 401ks. And that's the way they were measuring their support for Trump. So that's kind of a really narrow, rationale. And it ignores entirely all of the other aspects of adversity, right, in American society that was generated not only by Mr. Trump, but by the entire Republican Party. I mean, you know how scary it is to think in those terms?
Yeah,
That
well,
that
look, yeah, it's entirely selfish if all you do is say, look at your 401k and say, oh yeah, well, thank you, Trump, or look at the
well,
600.
they also say thank you for the tax break, and that I can't believe that at all, because I don't know where they are in the
Well,
bracketing for.
if they see the national debt and the debt that Trump's brought up, you see the contradiction in his view of here's a tax break, we're still going to spend, continue to spend. He made government bigger, the debt bigger. I think we're going to see a real reckoning. I mean, reckoning is going to be the big term that we use going forward. So, Dan,
Are we going to
yes,
see justice? I
well,
think we need to see justice. We need to see people punished.
we
We need to see people who did things either in civil court or in criminal court. We need to see them punished. We need to see them imprisoned.
we need to see certainly a reckoning. We need to see an accounting, right?
Yes.
Accountability is a big term. Look, Dan, as always, we tend to talk at length because there's so much to talk about. But I'm always fond of saying when I have Dan with me, we have spirited discussions about Filipino things, Filipino American issues, and where else are you going to get this kind of spirited discussion on whatever, a Saturday or a Sunday or whenever we do it, but here on this channel. And because you're not going to get in the mainstream, because
Nope.
as we saw in that
Nope.
comment, about the Filipino nurses, that the best comment is we got to begin at the bottom where let's see Filipino nurses on TV shows and Filipino doctors, so at
Yeah.
least we have a sense that they're there. We got to see the fictional side
Yeah.
in order to realize that they really are there in
Yep.
real life, which is, that's why it's both a good, bad comment because it shows how ridiculous and absurd the situation is for Filipino Americans.
It's not a direct attack on the reasons we're excluded. The direct attack is to reckon with the issue of racism, and particularly the kind of racism that gets aimed at Asian people,
Yeah.
and particularly Filipinos.
Right.
During the Reagan administration, when I was asked about these kinds of issues, I told students, look, this is just the beginning of the racial reckoning, because they said, why? And I said, because we are becoming supernumerary in the professions, particularly in the sciences and in medicine. And
Supernumerary.
white people are really upset. They're
Yeah.
they're tying this in with
Supernumerary.
affirmative action and saying if it wasn't for affirmative action, these black and brown people, they can't be qualified. There's no way black people and brown people, and these goddamn immigrants, we're taking care of the immigrants before we take
Yeah.
care of us, you know,
Well,
yeah.
supernumerary meaning there's more of us, right?
Uh, yeah. Did I
Well,
go
I
to
mean,
a multisyllabic term that strained your vocabulary? What happened?
super. Well, the point is, look at what's happening though. If we're supernumerary and we don't like the immigrants coming in with their doctoral degrees and their MD degrees and their nursing degrees, guess what? We're going to outsource our white doctors and send our white pre-meds and send them to Filipino schools and Dominican schools and all these other schools that were second rate for Filipinos and
Yeah,
Dominicans and
yeah,
other people.
yeah,
And and our second-rate white people to the Filipino schools and have them come back and treat the majority
that's
who are
right.
people of color.
How,
Because
how
we
about how
need
about the
doctors.
people?
All these,
Remember who was getting rescued from Grenada?
oh yeah, yeah,
There's a fake invasion of Grenada because there's some Cubans trying to build an airstrip, and so
yeah.
we invaded right during the Reagan administration Grenada, and who are they
Uh,
rescuing? Medical
the
students
white
at an
white
offshore medical
white
school.
people. Yeah. So this is what I see. We're gonna they're gonna
That was the
this is gonna
freaking
be
80s,
the change.
man.
Well, this is going to be the change now. Look, Dan, as always, I love you. I love the fact that we have these conversations and that we can share our conversations publicly, and that someday there will be a record that, hey, Filipinos weren't silent. Filipino Americans
Right
did
on.
not shut up when
Right
it
on.
came to things, that were of import, because we have these things that they have at the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. We have these things that show, hey, Filipinos did speak out, did have opinions. We weren't docile. We weren't the. Are we sleeping giants or just sleeping moderately tall folks who who are seen as docile and quiet?
Yeah, yeah.
No, we
Rex
got it.
Rex Navarrete, right, likes to refer to us as economically we have an economic stance and size. Okay.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if that's true, man.
Well, look,
I've seen
Dan,
Filipinos, very short people, eat a lot. Yeah.
yeah, Dan, as always, really, thank you for joining us. We'll put this online on amok.com. It'll also be on our Facebook site at FANHS, FANHS Museum. Facebook, it's a FANHS Museum, at FANHS Museum on our Facebook. Our Facebook Live is recorded. Also on Emil Guillermo Media. So Dan, thank you. I'm going to say goodbye to you here. Uh,
Okay.
Always a pleasure. Let's talk again next week, and maybe when the inaugural something will hit you, and you'll say, "Hey, where'd all the people go?" You'll say that. No.
Yeah, well, hopefully, it'll just hit me in a figurative mental sense rather
Yeah.
than a physical sense, because I don't want to get hit by anything on inauguration day.
Yeah. Well, I was there for a couple inaugurals. Uh, it's always a joy to be there, but now I know there's no joy, just
No,
fear.
it's
There's
yeah,
just there's a
it's
sense
just
of
this
fear.
foreboding. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
So,
mean,
Dan, and
it's really tough. So I'm gonna watch the thing, and I'm going to try and be celebratory, but right on the edge, we're always going to be thinking, you know,
Yeah.
Is anybody
How
going
do
to
we,
blow this thing up or try to do something violent? You know,
yeah, or like what, how do we get out of this and go forward, in terms of, because
it's
we'll have
really going to be a
we
hell
have
of a
the,
challenge. Hell of
yeah,
a challenge.
we'll have the celebratory party, but we got to still get out. All right, look,
Got to move.
Dan,
All right.
I got to run. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch for next week. And there's Dan Gonzales. Oh my God. Professor Dan Gonzales, College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State University. Oh, it's always a pleasure to have him. He's a great resource for me, for the museum, for all of us in the community. So thank you to Dan. Uh, Happy birthday again to Lady Perez. I said we were going to get to it. We did. We did get to Lady Perez. We talked about MLK Day. Enjoy the rest of your MLK Day. Enjoy the rest of your football if you did. If you missed this originally live because you had to watch football, okay, I got it. You watch football. But thank you, at least, for checking back and watching us. Thank you to everyone who's watching us live. Once again, my name is Emil Guillermo. Emil, I'm up to you. You can email me if you want to get your story on our program. Emil Amok, EMILAMOK at gmail.com, EMILAMOK at gmail.com. If you're watching this on amok.com, leave me a message there, amok.com. It's, the World Wide Web. You might be seeing this on our Facebook site at FANHS Museum, FANHS Museum on Facebook. Leave me a message on the chat. Or maybe you're seeing this on Emil Guillermo Media. If you're doing it, you can leave a message there too. Thank you for watching. What a weekend. The last weekend of Trump. A new day ahead. You see our reservations about, just what's going to happen. But follow us here. We'll have an opinion. We'll have a comment. See my columns on the ALDEF site, aaldef.org/blog, or on amok.com. Okay, I think I covered all the ways you can get in touch with me, us. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you enjoyed the Sunday brunch with Emil at the Fonz Museum. Boy, there's a lot to talk about. But as my dear friend, the late and lamented Filipino American historian and Stocktonian, Dawn Mabalon, might have said, oh, she did say it. She emailed me. She always said this. She said, Mahals and Salamats.